The CTO call was completely enhanced, and these people just want to believe what they want to hear. And that's exactly what they're doing. So it's just crazy to me that people have tried to twist this.
Something about the Nolan Wells case has kept the internet from looking away. An 18-year-old college student and athlete disappears after a 4th of July trip to Horn Island, Mississippi. 2 days later, his body is found. And almost immediately, social media begins asking the same question. What happened during those final hours? But now, TikTok users have shifted their attention toward another part of the story. A sitting Mississippi judge, Ashlee Cole, is connected to the case through her stepson, Warren Hudson, one of the young men who was with Nolan on Horn Island. That connection alone does not prove wrongdoing, and that distinction matters. Online, however, people have started describing Cole's background as a disturbing judge history, while others are suggesting that her position could somehow explain why the investigation unfolded the way it did. Those are allegations. They are not established facts. So tonight, instead of simply repeating everything circulating across TikTok, we are going to separate what is documented from what remains speculation. Because the real story is already disturbing enough without adding claims that cannot be proven. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He was a college student, an athlete, and someone described by people close to him as energetic, social, and deeply connected to his friends and family. He was also a football player at Southwest Mississippi Community College. On the 4th of July, Nolan traveled by boat with friends to Horn Island, a barrier island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The trip was supposed to be a holiday outing. Instead, it became the final known chapter of Nolan's life. According to the timeline reported by investigators and people connected to the group, the boat arrived at Horn Island late in the morning. Nolan was reportedly last seen around 3 in the afternoon. The other young men eventually left the island. Nolan did not. His body was discovered 2 days later by a National Park Service ranger near the northwest end of the island. His identity was later confirmed through dental records. That basic timeline is not really in dispute. What remains deeply disputed is what happened between Nolan being seen alive and the discovery of his body. The question is not simply why Nolan died. The question is why he was left behind, what happened afterward, and whether every part of that timeline has been properly explained. And that gap is exactly where social media speculation has exploded. This is where Judge Ashlee Cole enters the story. Cole is not accused by authorities of killing Nolan. She is not publicly identified as a suspect, and there is no verified evidence establishing that she committed a crime connected to Nolan's death. Her connection is through her family. Warren Hudson, her stepson, was one of the young men who traveled with Nolan to Horn Island. That connection became significant because Nolan did not return to the mainland with the group. As online attention intensified, people began examining Cole's position as a sitting judge. That is understandable. Whenever a public official becomes connected to an unexplained death investigation, people naturally want to know more about the official's background, responsibilities, and possible influence. But there is an important line between legitimate scrutiny and unsupported accusation. Cole serves as a judge in Mississippi's 16th Chancery District. Public judicial information identifies her as a sitting judge. She was elected to the bench in 2022 after working as an attorney. So when TikTok users describe her as having a disturbing judge history, viewers should ask a very simple question. What exactly does that phrase refer to? If it means she is a sitting judge connected by family to one of Nolan's friends, that is factual. But if it means she has a documented criminal or disciplinary history that proves wrongdoing in Nolan's case, I found no credible evidence establishing that. That difference is critical. After rumors began spreading online, Ashlee Cole publicly addressed the situation. She said her purpose was to dispel rumors with facts. Cole stated that her stepson Warren had been interviewed by the Jackson County Sheriff's Department and had cooperated with investigators. She also said Warren last saw Nolan at approximately 3 in the afternoon. According to Cole's account, the group left the island at around 4:30 after their boat experienced problems and began taking on water because of an issue with the bilge pump. Cole said Nolan made the decision to remain on the island and return later with another group of friends. That explanation became one of the central pieces of the public timeline, and it also became one of the biggest points of disagreement online. Some people accepted the account as a plausible explanation. Others immediately questioned why Nolan would remain behind, especially if he apparently did not return with his phone. The important point is that Cole's statement is a documented public account, but it is not the same thing as an independent finding by investigators. Her statement tells us what her family says happened. It does not independently establish every detail of Nolan's final hours, and that is exactly why the investigation matters. One of the most discussed details in the Nolan Wells case is his phone. According to reporting, Nolan's friends returned from Horn Island without him, but with his cell phone. For many people following the case, that detail immediately raised questions. Why would Nolan stay behind without his phone? Why would he separate from the group? And what happened to the phone afterward? Nolan's family has also raised concerns about digital information connected to his final day. Reports indicate that his mother tracked the cell phone to the home of one of the people connected to the trip. The family has sought access to digital records from several platforms in an effort to reconstruct Nolan's final movements and communications. Those records could potentially become extremely important because modern investigations often depend on digital timelines. Messages, location data, photos, video, application activity. All of these things can help investigators establish what happened and when. But, once again, there is a difference between saying digital records are being sought and saying those records prove a crime. They do not. At this stage, the public should be careful about treating deleted messages, missing photographs, or social media activity as automatic evidence of murder. There can be innocent explanations. There can also be serious explanations. The purpose of an investigation is to determine which explanation is actually supported by evidence. And that is why the phone remains such an important piece of this story. There is another part of the timeline that deserves attention: the boat. Later reporting provided additional information about the boat's movements. According to available GPS information, the boat left a private dock in the morning and reached Horn Island around late morning. The boat eventually departed the island at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon. That timing matters because it broadly supports one part of the account given by Cole and the young men. There is also reportedly audio capturing a call for help from one of the teenagers on the boat as the vessel was experiencing problems. In the recording, the young person reportedly tells a towing company that the group is sinking and asks for assistance. That information does not answer what happened to Nolan, but it does provide important context for why the group may have left the island. In other words, the boat problem is not simply an internet rumor. There is evidence supporting the existence of a mechanical or water-related problem. That does not automatically prove everything else in the story, but it does mean viewers should be cautious about claims that the entire explanation was invented. The timeline remains incomplete, and an incomplete timeline naturally creates questions. But questions are not convictions. That is one of the most important principles to remember while following this case. So why did TikTok become so focused on Ashlee Cole? The answer is fairly simple. Her connection to Nolan's final known hours is unusually close. Her stepson was among the people who traveled with Nolan. She is also a sitting judge, and she publicly discussed the situation while the investigation was still active. For people who were already suspicious of the circumstances, those details created a powerful narrative. But there is another side. Cole has said that her family did not interfere with the investigation. She stated that her husband and she were not on Horn Island that day. She said Warren cooperated with investigators, and she publicly expressed sympathy for Nolan's family. She also said she temporarily deactivated her Facebook account because of the intense reaction and concerns about safety. None of that proves that every statement made by the family is correct, but it also means we cannot fairly transform suspicion into a factual accusation. There is currently no credible evidence showing that Cole used her position as a judge to stop investigators from doing their work. There is a public debate about the appearance of the situation. That is legitimate, but appearance and proof are two very different things. Now we reach the part of the story that requires the most caution: the so-called disturbing judge history. TikTok users have been circulating claims about Judge Cole's past, but what does the documented record actually show? Available professional information identifies Cole as an attorney who worked in Mississippi before becoming a judge. She later won election to the bench. Public judicial information confirms her position. What I did not find in credible reporting or the public sources reviewed was evidence establishing a criminal history or proven judicial misconduct record that directly connects her to Nolan's death. That does not mean people cannot investigate her background. Presenter TV, Dynamis. It means the conclusion must match the evidence. If a TikTok video says, "Look at this judge's disturbing history," viewers should immediately ask another simple question. What document proves it? Is there a court ruling? A disciplinary decision? An official complaint? A criminal charge? A verified investigation? Or is it simply another creator repeating something they saw somewhere else? That distinction is everything, because Nolan's family deserves answers. But the family also deserves a search for truth, not a flood of unverified accusations. And if future evidence establishes wrongdoing by anyone, that evidence should be examined seriously. Until then, the responsible position is to keep allegations labeled as allegations. There is another reason this case has become so emotionally charged. Nolan was black. The young men pictured with him during the boat trip were white. One of those young men was Warren Hudson, whose stepmother is Judge Ashlee Cole. That racial dynamic has become a major part of the public discussion. Nolan's family and civil rights advocates have raised concerns about whether authorities treated the disappearance with enough urgency. The family has also pointed to Mississippi's long and painful history of racial injustice. That history cannot simply be ignored. At the same time, historical context is not proof that a particular person committed a particular crime. Both things can be true. People can reasonably question whether the investigation was handled properly.
And people can also insist that accusations against individuals must be supported by evidence. For many viewers, this case is bigger than one teenager. It is about whether families can trust authorities when something goes wrong. It is about whether social status changes the way people are treated. And it is about whether an investigation can remain transparent when powerful or well-connected people become part of the story. Those are legitimate questions, but they should be answered through evidence, not hashtags, not speculation, and not viral accusations. The case also attracted attention from television personality and former judge Greg Mathis. Mathis publicly said he believed the circumstances deserved serious scrutiny and expressed skepticism about the drowning explanation. He went further and said he believed Nolan was killed. But there is a major distinction here. Mathis was expressing an opinion. He was not announcing an official investigative conclusion. His comments demonstrate how strongly some observers feel about the circumstances, but they do not replace forensic findings or the work of law enforcement. This is another example of why the Nolan Wells story has become so complicated. Every new voice can influence public opinion. A judge speaks, an attorney speaks, a family member speaks, a TikTok creator speaks, a television commentator speaks, and suddenly, millions of people may have heard a conclusion before they have seen the evidence behind it. That can be dangerous.
Because once a narrative becomes emotionally powerful, people often interpret every new fact as confirmation, and that is especially powerful in unresolved death investigations. The responsible approach is to listen to every credible source, but reserve judgment until the evidence is complete. Then something happened that made an already tense situation even more disturbing. People connected to the case began receiving threats. In one federal case, a California man was accused of sending threatening messages to Judge Ashlee Cole, including an alleged threat involving a bomb at her office. Federal authorities later arrested and charged the man with interstate transmission of a threatening communication. This is important because it demonstrates how far online anger had escalated. People were no longer simply discussing the case. Some were allegedly threatening real people, and that crosses a completely different line. Cole said her family had received threats and expressed concern for her children. Meanwhile, Nolan's family has also said they faced harassment and threats. That creates a tragic situation where both sides of an already painful story are experiencing fear and hostility. And it highlights a serious problem with social media investigations. People can begin with a legitimate question. Then someone posts a theory. Another person adds an assumption. A third person presents that assumption as fact. Soon, thousands of people believe a story that was never actually proven. Then, someone decides that because they believe the story, they are justified in threatening another human being. They are not. Accountability requires evidence. Threats destroy accountability. So where does the official investigation actually stand? This may be the most important part of the entire story. Authorities have not publicly identified a suspect in Nolan Wells' death. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office previously said that no foul play was suspected at that stage of the investigation. Nolan's friends have been described as cooperating with authorities. At the same time, Nolan's family has continued pushing for more answers and a deeper investigation. An independent autopsy reportedly did not determine a definitive cause of death. The official state autopsy has also been a major point of anticipation. That means the central question remains unresolved. How exactly did Nolan die? Without a confirmed cause of death, many theories remain impossible to prove. This is why responsible reporting must resist the temptation to announce an answer before investigators have one. The family deserves certainty, the public deserves transparency, and anyone who may have information deserves a fair investigation rather than an internet trial. That is particularly important because once someone's name becomes associated with a viral theory, reputational damage can happen long before any official finding. In Nolan's case, there are enough documented questions already.
We do not need to invent additional ones. So let's make the distinction as simple as possible. What is fact? Nolan Wells went to Horn Island on the 4th of July. He was last known to be alive on the island that afternoon. His friends returned without him. His body was found 2 days later. Warren Hudson was among the people with Nolan. Hudson's stepmother is Judge Ashlee Cole. Cole publicly addressed rumors involving her family. She said Warren cooperated with investigators. She said the boat experienced problems. She said Nolan chose to remain behind. The case has generated intense public scrutiny, and people connected to the case have faced online threats. Now, what remains rumor or unproven speculation? The claim that Judge Cole secretly controlled or obstructed the investigation has not been established by credible evidence. The claim that her professional history proves she was involved in Nolan's death has also not been established. The claim that every deleted social media item proves a cover-up has not been established. And the claim that Nolan's death has already officially been classified as murder is also not established. That is the line we have to protect. Because saying we do not know yet is not weakness. Sometimes it is the most honest answer available. The Nolan Wells case remains compelling because the unanswered questions are not small. Why did Nolan stay behind? Why was he separated from his original group? Why did he not return with the boat?
What exactly happened after approximately 3 in the afternoon? What happened to Nolan's phone? What will the digital records reveal? What will the official autopsy establish? And, perhaps most importantly, does the complete evidence support the idea of an accident or something more serious? Those questions remain open. There are also questions about public confidence. Could investigators have communicated more clearly with Nolan's family? Could the early response have been faster? Did the involvement of a judge's family member create an appearance of conflict, even if no actual interference occurred? These are legitimate questions for journalists, investigators, and the public. But asking whether there was an appearance of conflict is not the same as accusing Cole of criminal conduct. That distinction matters, because this case is already emotionally devastating. The goal should be to uncover what happened to Nolan, not to manufacture a villain before the evidence is complete. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson from the entire TikTok explosion. The internet can discover information, but the internet cannot replace an investigation. At the center of all of this is a young man whose life ended far too soon. Nolan Wells was not a hashtag. He was not a TikTok mystery. He was someone's son, someone's friend, a student, an athlete, and a young person with a future that his family expected to see unfold. His parents are still looking for answers. That is why the public interest matters.
But public interest should be directed toward evidence. If the investigation eventually reveals negligence, misconduct, or criminal responsibility, those findings should be reported clearly. If the evidence shows an accident, that should also be reported clearly. And if the evidence reveals something nobody expected, then that evidence should speak for itself. As for Judge Ashlee Cole, the verified record currently shows a sitting Mississippi Chancery judge whose stepson was connected to Nolan's final known hours. It does not, based on the credible sources reviewed here, establish a proven criminal disturbing history connected to Nolan's death. That may not satisfy TikTok. It may not satisfy people who already believe they know what happened. But journalism is not about satisfying a theory. It is about following the evidence. And right now, the biggest story is not whether TikTok has found a villain. The biggest story is that Nolan Wells' death remains surrounded by unanswered questions. Until those questions are resolved, the most powerful thing the public can demand is simple: transparency, accountability, and the truth, because Nolan deserves nothing less.